I'm back with another pre-built gaming desktop review, and this time around it's the turn of AWD IT and the Corsair powered system you see behind me called the Erebus. And when I say Corsair powered, I'm not solely referring to the power supply. This machine is packing Corsair components almost everywhere it can, including some of their iCUE link cooling components. I'm going to run it through the usual set of games and benchmarks and see how it fares. Hi guys, I'm Matt and welcome to KitGuru. So before we dive in to look at the PC in detail, let's get some housekeeping out of the way regarding the system builder, the warranty and the pricing. AWD IT are an online PC and tech retailer based in Stoke-on-Trent in Staffordshire. They've been around since 2006 and they're a well-established name within the market here in the UK. Every system they sell comes with a 3-year warranty which covers labour, parts, fault finding and repairs over the full 3 years, and they even offer support remotely, which was really nice to see. Return postage costs are covered for the first 6 months of you owning a system from them, and what's more, you get lifetime technical support even after your warranty has expired. I was genuinely pretty impressed with the details of their warranty when I looked it up while making this video. The system we're looking at today is priced at £1,799 including VAT and delivery. You can tweak the specs if you order something though, but obviously that's going to change the pricing. This system at 1800 quid will get you the following specs. The CPU is the Ryzen 7 7700X from AMD. This has got 8 cores and 16 threads running at a base clock speed of 4.5 GHz and topping out on paper at a maximum of 5.4 GHz boost. It's obviously an AM5 socket CPU and it's got a TDP of 105 watts. That CPU is sitting in an Asus ROG Strix B650E-F gaming Wi-Fi motherboard, a pretty decent mid-range B650 chipset board. It boasts Gen 5 support for one of the PCIe slots and one of the 3 tile M.2 slots. All 3 of those M.2 slots have included heat sinks to help with storage cooling, and it's got onboard Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth 5.2. The rear I/O is pretty pleasing with a total of 12 onboard USB ports. You've got 4 Type A 3.2 Gen 1, 4 Type A 2.0 and 4 Type A 3.2 Gen 2 ports, and then you've got 2 USB Type C ports, one 3.2 Gen 2 10 gig and one 3.2 Gen 2x2 20 gig. Then alongside all of the USB ports, you've got a single HDMI and a single display port, an Intel 2.5 gig Ethernet port, and then the audio jacks, the Wi-Fi antenna connectors, and then a BIOS flashback button. The pretty beefy VRM heatsinks and chipset heatsinks are adorned with some ROG branding and RGB, as we come to expect from ROG series products. Overall, it's a fairly decent board that has room for expansion of both memory and storage down the line if it's ever needed when you take the spec of the current computer into account. Handling the graphics, we have an NVIDIA RTX 4070 Super, more specifically the Asus Dual Super Evo OC version. This is a dual fan 2.5 slot card which features 12 gig of GDDR6X memory running at a base clock speed of 1980 MHz and a maximum boost clock speed of 2520 MHz. It's got 7168 CUDA cores and it supports DLSS 3 and frame generation alongside the 3rd gen ray tracing cores that will handle some ray trace gaming if that's what you're into and that's what you fancy. Memory comes in the form of a 32GB kit of Corsair Vengeance RGB running at 6000 megatransfers with CL30 timing and consisting of 2 16GB modules. For storage, we have a Western Digital Blue SN580 2TB M.2 NVMe SSD. This is a PCIe Gen 4 drive that I clocked at 4228 MB per second read and 3893 MB per second write when I tested it with Crystal Disk Mark. While I'm happy with the capacity, 2TB, as you've heard me say in previous videos, should be a standard on any gaming machine nowadays, in my opinion. I'm not too happy with the speed. This is on the slower end of the spectrum when compared to some other PCIe Gen 4 drives I've seen in the pre-builts that I've looked at in the past, like the Solidigm P44 Pro, for example. And what's more, there's a Gen 5 M.2 slot sitting empty on the motherboard. And a final, maybe slightly nitpicky point is that this PC was described to me as being powered by Corsair before it arrived. Corsair do produce Gen 5 M.2 SSDs, so it would make sense for one to be installed in the system, or even a PCIe Gen 4 Corsair SSD. Staying true to the powered by Corsair description though is the power supply, a Corsair RM750X Shift unit. This is an 80 plus gold rated 750 watt power supply, which is fully modular and features Corsair's side cable interface for easily accessing cables when you take the side of the case off. It's a clever design, and I like it when brands think like this rather than sticking to the tried and tested. That sort of innovation is what pushes the gaming industry and technology as a whole forward, when brands try something a bit new and a bit different, and I like that sort of stuff. Cooling the 7700X CPU is a Corsair iCUE Link H150i 360mm AIO. I've got a feeling we're going to start seeing a lot of these iCUE Link coolers in pre-builts going forward. The last pre-built I looked at from PC Specialist contained a H100i iCUE Link cooler, which is the 240mm version of the cooler found in this AWD IT system. And this suits me, to be fair. I can't moan about it, as I quite like these coolers. We'll take a look at the performance a little later on when I run through the charts and the benchmarks, but aesthetically, the included QX120 fans are fantastic. They feature Corsair's time warp mode, which will trick your eyes into thinking the fan blades have stopped, with some synchronized RGB magic. Then on top of that, the cooler comes packaged with a Corsair iCUE Link hub, allowing up to 14 iCUE Link devices to be connected while keeping cables to a minimum. Anyone who's built or upgraded a system with a lot of RGB fans will know the pain of trying to manage a billion cables. I'm grateful that a lot of brands, not just Corsair, have addressed this issue in recent times, the past year or two. Housing all of that is a black Corsair 3500X case, more specifically the iCUE Link RGB version. It's a mid-tower chassis that features front and side glass panels and a design that's become pretty standard in recent times. It comes with 3 installed iCUE Link RX RGB fans, which AWD IT have set them up, or they came like that by default, but they're set up as intake on the side/front section of the case. It supports a 360mm rad in the top and the side. AWD, again, they've stuck it at the top and set it up as exhaust. I'm not sure if they did that intentionally or they just stuck it where there was some empty space left in the case. The case will support up to 10 120mm fans or 5 140mm fans if you go down the all air cooled route. Front I/O on the case consists of a pair of USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type A ports and a USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type C port, alongside a headphone and mic combo audio jack. The cooling setup on the system as a whole strikes me as being okay. Another 120mm fan in the back as exhaust maybe wouldn't go amiss, though I'd like to have seen that. Design wise, I think it's a decent looking system, although one small annoyance I have is the mismatched Corsair fans. The case's RX RGB fans don't support that time warp lighting mode that I mentioned earlier, whereas the QX fans that come with the cooler do, which is great, but you can't see them all that well as they're installed on the radiator at the top of the case. And what's more, time warp lighting looks much better when it's running on all of the fans at the same time. It's not a major issue and it certainly doesn't affect performance, but it did slightly irk me a little bit when I was messing around with the lighting setup. Also, the Corsair fans installed in the case didn't have their lighting set up correctly when the system was delivered to me. They were kind of out of order, with the middle fan lighting up first when using sequential effects like visor. If you've ever messed with iCUE, you'll know what I'm talking about, where the light travels from one side of the case to the other. I had to go into iCUE and change the order of the fans. Again, it's nothing major, but someone new to PC gaming might not know how to do that. And if it was set up correctly before delivery, it'd likely save the customer a bit of hassle either Googling how to fix it or potentially having to contact AWD IT. Aside from those 2 small issues, cable management is pretty good. Everything looks to have been installed with care and attention to detail. If I was building this system myself, I'd probably move the radiator to the side to show off the fancy lighting, but overall AWD IT have set this up to an okay standard. If you're looking for a new chair, then you should definitely check out Booley's. I'm currently sat on their Ninja Pro gaming chair, which is one of 3 models from their gaming series alongside the Elite and the Master. So if you're looking for something new to stick in your setup that you can sit on and game and work, then I recommend definitely checking out boolies.co.uk. Right, that's all of the specs out of the way. Overall, it's a decent system on paper. So let's dive into the benchmarks and see how the Erebus fared through my testing. As always, I haven't done anything other than update Windows before I started testing the system. Kicking things off with Cinebench Multicore then, and the Erebus recorded a score of 19,493 points, placing it above the 5800 and 7800X 3D processors, but some way behind the i5 13600K. The 7700X hovers somewhere between 5 to 5.1 GHz when running an all-core test such as this, while managing 5.5 GHz while working through the single-core variant of the Cinebench benchmark. That leads to a single-core benchmark result of 1,991 points, seeing it leapfrog that 13600K and land just below the 7950X while using 21 watts less power. 3D Mark TimeSpy results put the Erebus in roughly the middle of the pack when compared against previous systems that I've reviewed. The 4070 Super systems are all pretty much grouped together on the GPU metric, as I'd expect. This system falls slightly behind, possibly due to differing cooling and GPU clock speeds on the different GPU model. Looking at the CPU metric puts this system second overall, again losing out to an Intel processor, namely the i5 13500 found in the Quantum Pro S from PC Specialist. Measuring the memory with AIDA 64 results in read speeds of 59,378 megabytes per second and write speeds of 81,406 megabytes per second from the Corsair Vengeance RGB 6000 megatransfers memory found in the Erebus. Finally, PC Mark 10 shows the system's overall capabilities, content creation being the highlight at 15,536 points due to the GPU found in the system. The overall score was 9,249 points, Essentials was 12,085 points, and Productivity was 11,440 points. Moving into gaming then and kicking things off with Cyberpunk 2077, and at 1440p this got an average FPS of 78.1 with a 1% low of 61.6, while at 4K that FPS dipped to 35.4 on average with a 1% low of 28.6. Company of Heroes 3 then, and at 1440p this one was a pretty lofty result at 184.5 FPS average with a 1% low of 133.8, while at 4K that dropped down to 110.6 average FPS and 91.8 1% low. Hogwarts Legacy then at 1440p was 87.8 average FPS with a 1% low of 48.1, and then at 4K it was 47.2 average FPS with a 1% low of 29.6. The 1% low figures in this game are a bit disappointing. Moving on to Shadow of the Tomb Raider then, and at 1440p this game ran at an average of 171.9 FPS with a 1% low of 153.8, while at 4K the average FPS dropped to 88.4, still very respectable on max graphics settings in this game, while the 1% low was 82.6. The Witcher 3 then at 1440p recorded average FPS results of 74 on the dot with a 1% low of 50.6, while at 4K that dipped down to 39.3 average FPS with a 1% low of 33.8. A Plague Tale Requiem then at 1440p saw average FPS of 75 exactly with a 1% low of 66.1, while at 4K that dropped down to 40.8 average FPS with a 1% low of 36.8. F123 then, the first of 2 racing titles in my benchmark lineup. Average FPS at 1440p was 163.9 with a 1% low of 131.5, while at 4K this was a pretty impressive result. The average FPS stayed above 100 at 117.6, while the 1% low was 104.4. Forza Motorsport then at 1440p was 114.5 average FPS with a 1% low of 85.4, while at 4K that average FPS was 80.6 with a 1% low of 72.8. The penultimate game in my lineup then, Assassin's Creed Mirage. At 1440p I saw average performance of 120.1 FPS with a 1% low of 89 exactly, and then at 4K that was 73.1 average FPS with a 1% low of 59.6. And last but not least then, Starfield at 1440p saw average FPS readings of 73.8 with a 1% low of 52.5, while at 4K that average dipped to 42.2 with a 1% low of 35.2. And finally, to round out the gaming section then, with a look at the average gaming performance across all 10 of the benchmarks at both resolutions that I tested. On average, the Erebus desktop scored 114.4 FPS at 1440p with an 87.21% low, while at 4K that average dropped to 67.5 with a 1% low of 57.5. So 60 plus average FPS across all the titles at 4K on this machine is pretty impressive. Moving on to look at thermals, noise and power then, and CPU package power measurements were roughly 39 watts when idle, 135 watts during a Cinebench multi-core benchmark, and 78 watts during a 30-minute Cyberpunk 2077 test. And during those same tests, the Ryzen 7700X sat at 49 degrees when idle, 95 degrees when running Cinebench multi-core across a 30-minute run, which is a little too toasty for my liking and getting close to the limits of the processor. This is with stock settings though, so it could be improved with a little tinkering with PBO or curve optimizer. Thankfully, during gaming, the system handles keeping the CPU cool much better, with the package temperature measured at 63 degrees in Cyberpunk. GPU temperature during that same 30-minute Cyberpunk test saw temperatures of 72 degrees on GPU, 84 degrees on hotspot, and 78 degrees on memory. With that heat though, of course, comes the extra noise of the fans ramping up and down. The system out of the box and with the settings that it was sent to me with has a pretty aggressive fan curve. The fans are very noticeable when they kick in. It's not that they're overly loud, they just go from hardly spinning to full whack pretty quickly. As usual, I haven't tweaked it, as I like to show you the system as it would arrive from a system builder to a customer, but you definitely could tweak that sort of stuff pretty easily. With that being said though, I measured the system producing a reading of 33 decibels on my sound meter when idle, 45 decibels when running Cinebench, and 43 decibels when gaming. They sound like this. Last but not least then, total system power when measured at the socket was 105 watts when idle, 235 watts in Cinebench multicore, and 402 watts when running a game like Cyberpunk 2077. Overall then, the Erebus is a decent gaming system from AWD IT. It performed pretty well during my gaming benchmarks, hitting 67 FPS on average at 4K and 114 FPS on average at 1440p across the 10 titles that I tested in this review. There are a few things that I'd change though, as I feel the balance of the build is a little bit off. The Corsair cooler and case, while they are very nice to look at and I do like them, they could be a little lower spec'd in the build overall, which would allow more money to be put into the CPU, possibly upgrading it to something like a 7800X3D. The SSD isn't amazingly fast, especially when there's a Gen 5 compatible M.2 slot on the motherboard sitting there unused. That motherboard is good though, and it does have some headroom for upgrading or adding in extra storage or extra memory down the line if you want to. The mismatched fans bothered me probably more than they should have, but I just don't see anyone using Time Warp RGB on only 3 of the 6 fans. It's by far the coolest lighting effect on this new Corsair stuff in my opinion, and even if you were to run it on just 3 fans in the Erebus, you'd definitely want to move the radiator to the side so you can see it better. Pricing is great though, and a big plus point. I priced up the same system on PC Part Picker and it came in at around £1,740. So you're paying roughly 60 quid for the peace of mind that the warranty gives you, as well as an official non-grey market copy of Windows 11. All in all, the Erebus is the first system from AWD IT that I've looked at, and it's a very, very good start. It could be better, but it could be a lot worse. And that's the end of the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave me a like down below if you did. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to keep up with the latest PC gaming news and reviews. Go down below the video if you want to grab a t-shirt, a mug, a sticker, whatever. You'll find links to our merch stuff down there. And then in the video's description, you'll find more links to our Discord server, our Patreon page if you want to support us a bit further, and our website where you'll be able to read a written review of this and news about gaming, releases, all that good stuff. Go and check it out. Anyway, guys, I've been Matt. This on the desk behind me has been the Erebus pre-built gaming desktop from AWD IT. I will speak to you in the next one. Look after yourselves. See you later.